Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Riley Newton, and I'm hanging out with a couple other folks from the Orchard.
Emily Crosby, Girls Discipleship Pastor.
And I'm Will Rambo.
So we are going live to kick off our Real Talk series before we even really get to our Real Talk series. And we're super excited about it. We asked a bunch of questions, or y'all asked a bunch of questions last Wednesday. We gave out some note cards at OSM. And we have so many good questions that we had to figure out a way to get some answers.
So many good questions.
4 pages of questions.
So
many.
Today we're going to be walking through some of those questions.
Yep.
And again, this is just some of the questions. We had so many that we're going to have to try to tackle some during our series and also going live a couple more times after this. But yeah, we're just going to jump right in and we're going to ask some questions and hopefully get some answers. So if you're tuning in and you're live and you want to ask some questions that we aren't talking about, you're welcome to comment on the live video and you can ask us questions and we'll try to answer those. If there's any questions that you have based on our answers for the questions that were already asked, we'd love for you to ask and get some clarifying information too. So other than that, I think we're going to jump right in.
Let's go.
So one of the questions that I thought was really cool and a question that's really applicable for everybody at every stage in their life was this: how do I know if I'm in a godly friendship with somebody? How do you know if you have a true friend? So Emily, do you want to jump off and tackle that one?
Sure. So I feel like these 2 questions can kind of tie together. So I'm going to try my best to give one big example for both. But Proverbs 18 verse 24 says, "There are friends who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother." Whether you're in middle school or high school, friendships can be super tough. Whatever stage of life that you're in, especially in middle school, you're trying to figure out who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And sometimes it's just really hard to try to figure out who your friends are. And what's interesting is this past weekend, I actually had a student message me on Instagram asking about a friendship. And she knew that it was not healthy for her, but she wanted to work through that and how she could be a better example for her friend. But I think to get to the gist of the whole friendship thing, how do I know I have a true friend in a godly friendship? No matter what stage of life you're in, whether you're in high school or whether you're out of high school, I think you really have to look at how they're treating you, but also like how they're treating others. A true friend and a godly friend is going to be someone who's going to really push you and encourage you and pray for you and love you the way that Christ is going to love you. These people are going to be the ones who are going to uplift you and just really be there. And it's some people that you're going to be able to trust like fully. And so I think some stories in my life, like I thought I had some friends who were really good for me, but learning what a true and godly friendship is has really changed my mindset. And I'm very thankful for the friends that I have now, because now I know what that looks like. And so these people uplift me, they encourage me, they push me, they pray for me, and they affirm me. And I think that is the example of what a true and godly friendship is.
Yeah. I love that you include that part about they challenge us too, because I think we're sometimes told that a friend is somebody who just backs us alone.
Yeah.
And even if we're running down the wrong road, they're at least with us. Yeah. But the fact that you include, I just think it shows your wisdom that it's somebody that'll challenge us too and help us become more who we need to be. That's so good.
For sure.
Exactly.
Like, hey, should I eat these 24 donuts? Probably just eat like 6 of those.
That's exactly the kind of friendship we're talking about.
Exactly.
Or tacos.
Yeah, tacos too. Definitely still applies. So along the same veins, sort of another relationship question. This one's for us, you Will. Yep. How do you get over someone that you thought would last?
Yeah. That's such a big question, because there's nothing easy about getting over a relationship. There's nothing simple about it. I certainly had relationships in high school and in college that I thought would endure. Because every time that you're dating somebody and you're with somebody and you have this idea of, could this be, is it? And so we're always evaluating in that way. But a part of my story that I know you guys know, and I know some of you may know, but not everybody may know, is when I moved to Tupelo to come to the Orchard 15 and a half years ago, I was actually engaged to somebody who's not Marissa, who is my wife now. I was engaged to a girl. She was a great girl. She's a great woman. But the distance of us moving made it become really clear that our relationship wasn't healthy. It wasn't the best relationship. And I'll be real honest with you. A lot of that was on me. Like I wasn't who I needed to be. I wasn't healthy. I wasn't the kind of man that I needed to be. And because of that, that became really clear with distance. And I can own that now. I probably couldn't have articulated that at that time, but I can definitely articulate that now. So I'm 25. I've just moved to a new town. Tupelo is a great place to live. It's not always as easy to be 25 when you know nobody in town. And I have to tell everybody in our church that when they ask me about my wedding, I have to go, that wedding's not happening anymore. So if you're checking in, whether you're junior high or high school, like I absolutely understand. I can completely relate to you of what it's like to have this view of somebody that you think is going to endure. So here's a couple of things I would advise you that I learned in my own difficult seasons. One is don't move on too quickly. And let me tell you right now, you're going to have some people in your life who are going to tell you to move on as quickly as possible. You got to just get back out there. That's the best thing for you to do. Buddies will tell you just to go find somebody else to hook up with. But here's what I've learned along the way is that if we don't deal with our emotional baggage, we just drag it in with us to the next relationship. It takes time to heal. It's okay to just take time to breathe. You need to heal from the things that you're wounded, particularly if you're the one asking the question. You're the one that probably is hurting and missing something. You want to take some time and you want to get well. Number two is deepen your friendships. At the ages and stages that you're at in middle school and high school, if a relationship is ended, it gives you an opportunity to re-engage in some deep friendships. Deepen those friendships. Find people the kind of people that Emily just described. Find those people in your life who speak. The third thing I'd say is find someone who is not your peer. When I want to talk to somebody right now at my stage, when I'm a parent, I don't talk to people who are also parenting kids my age because none of us are sleeping and we're all exhausted. And so I talk to somebody who's ahead of me. And so find someone. Look, I have a part in like who gets to hang out with our students. There's a reason we put people in place that I trust. Find one of our youth staff. Find your small group leader. You've got incredible men and women who lead your small groups. Find someone who's in a different phase of life that will speak wisdom for you. And the last thing is continue to pursue God. And you may go, well, of course they're going to say that. It's the orchard. But here's what I mean by that. Some of the most difficult seasons in my life have produced some of the greatest growth. Pain can be clarifying. And sometimes when we thought we had something that was going to last, it helps us reprioritize and get our eyes on something that actually will last. And so pursue God in that time, and I think that you'll find that he will be faithful to you. So I think that's some thoughts I have about maybe our best ways forward.
That's super good. I definitely, the whole thing about making sure that you've dealt with all the emotional baggage. I think one of the things I remember you saying was if you don't forgive who cut you, you'll bleed on people. Wait, how's it go?
If you don't forgive if you don't heal from what cut you, you'll bleed on those who never hurt you.
Yeah, dude, it's so good.
Yeah.
That's something that really has stuck out to me and been something that I want to make sure that as I'm going into relationships, whether it's friendships or with other people,
absolutely,
romantically, to carry that mantra is true. Because if you do that, and you don't carry emotional baggage into those relationships, if things don't work out, it's a whole lot easier because you're not dealing with all of the stuff from your past too.
And that's such a wise thing for you to say, because I think your perception is probably like mine was most of my life, and that there's only two options. We either have to make it forever, or we have to hate each other and talk about each other terribly.
Yeah, seriously.
And man, wouldn't it be great if the church was able to be the place where you modeled what it was like to date healthy and to move on in healthy ways? Mm-hmm. Man, that'd be incredible if the church could be the epicenter of health.
Yeah, man, that's so good. That's so good. Cool. So our next question is this: how do you balance school, sports, worship, prayer, and have a social life without getting stressed? I wish that I could tell you at 26 that I have that completely figured out. Will, you're a little bit older. Do you still have that figured out? You have some.
I just got stressed out when you asked the question.
Yeah. So I don't have it all figured out. I think stress is just going to be a part of life. But here's some ways that I have organized my life so that hopefully the stress doesn't amount to as much. And if times do get stressful, I still have some structure in my life so that I can lean into the things I need to do. So I think the first thing that's really important when we're trying to balance these things is we have to figure out what's essential to us. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't know what's essential to us, then we're just going to go and do whatever's in front of us. And I don't know about you, but I've done that a lot of times in my life, and it never really ends well whenever I'm just doing the thing that I need to do, because it doesn't really leave much room for growth. If you're always focusing on what you have to do, you can't really do the things that you want to do or the things that you need to do. So what are the things that you hold central? For me, my number one priority every single day is prayer, is reading the scriptures. So I'll sit down every single morning. I wake up at 7:15, and I know some of you probably just like shudder thinking about waking up earlier than you have to for school. And honestly, I was that same way too for a really long time in my life. And I always wondered why my prayer life suffered whenever things got stressful or hard. And it was because I never really held it as central. So for me now, it's every single day, no matter how late I was up that night, I try to wake up at the same time and go spend some time with God, to read the scriptures and then to pray about my day. Because when those things start my day goes so much better, and it seems like things aren't as stressful or they work out a little bit better. And Jesus did that all the time too. So don't just do that because I'm telling you to do that. Jesus actually did that. Like that's how he like organizes his day.
It's a good example.
So,
Also.
yeah.
Awesome.
So that's why I do that. Not
Jesus
just
and
'cause I
Riley.
want to.
Jesus and Riley.
So from there, for me, I pick out the other things that are essential to me. So every day I have a job. I work here at the Orchard. So work is the thing that's really central to me. I come to work almost every day of the week. I have friends who are really central in my life. And I have school. I'm actually still a student. I'm getting a master's degree. So with those three things and prayer, those are like the four things that I know I need to make time for every single day. And I'll actually schedule those things every single week. So I know what time I'm going to come into work. I've gotten to the point where I actually schedule to spend time with friends, because not only does it help me make sure that I spend time with them, but it gives me something to look forward to. Like knowing that I get to go eat dinner with my friend Tarver on Mondays. That's something that we did for a really long time, and we've gotten out of rhythm with that, just because things have gotten a little bit stressful. But then there's other friends too that have scheduled time to spend time with them, and that's been really helpful for me, because when I know that's coming, I can reorganize the other things and get less stressed. So once I have all the big things blocked into my week or into my day, all the things that I like to do, the little things, they kind of fall into place after that. Like I love to play disc golf. That's one of my favorite things, is to go out and walk through the woods and throw some frisbees and hit trees on accident. It's a really good time. It's kind of a sport, not really, but kind of. I also like to play video games. Also not really a sport unless you're into esports. I guess it's kind of a thing. But those things are the things that are not necessarily priorities for me, but they're really fun. And so whenever I have those big things in place, those things sort of just fall into place around those. So whenever I get really stressed, instead of giving up my prayer for the day, a lot of times it'll just be me, hey, like maybe I just need to go play disc golf tomorrow. Maybe I should only play 30 minutes of Call of Duty today instead of spending 2 hours. So even whenever my life gets stressful, the structure keeps it from the little things distracting me from the bigger things. So hopefully that's helpful when it comes to figuring out how to manage all those things, because it is really hard. And I mean, like I said, for me and my friend Tarver, going and get that dinner was central for a really long time. And when life gets busy and life gets hectic, those things start to fade away. So that's something that I'm still trying to get better at and do better too. So I'm gonna text Tarver after this, and we're gonna get some dinner, and it's gonna be great. Do y'all have any thoughts about that?
I just think that language is really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think you give a model too of a workable way. So I would say several of the ways you even give language, though my life phase is a little bit different. I think about it the same way. I mean, I get up when I do based on what the day is going to look like, and knowing that if I start my day in an appropriate manner, it seems like everything else flows from there. And I do think that, and it may sound in a way that you don't want to do that yet, but I think the more that you're able to prioritize and to schedule those things out, I just think that's such a helpful tool to consider. And if we're able to do that in a way in a middle school and high school age level, if you're able to do that now, you've got some tools in your tool belt for the future of figuring out stress and battles that there's plenty of adults who are still figuring out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
And even if they don't know how to structure their day, they're more than welcome to come to us and ask us questions about that. So
yeah, absolutely. For sure. And also prayer and worship and reading scripture, that's different for a lot of different people. I know people who wake up early and do that, and I know people who it's the last thing they do before they go to bed. As long as it's the priority and you're carving out time to do that, I think that's what's important.
Yes, and I was definitely trying to emphasize that the idea of them planning when it is is more important than when it is.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's so good.
Good stuff. So here's a very important question. Might be the most important thing that we've talked about so far. Pizza or tacos?
Oh man. I'm more of a taco person, just because I don't know. I think you have a wide variety of choices when it comes to tacos.
Right.
And sometimes stuff on pizza just doesn't go very well. I don't know. I'm just a big taco person.
Yeah, I feel that.
Shout out to my friend Adam and his new joint in town, because I'll bring this into an intense battle and say, as most of us probably know, the right answer is pizza, because pizza is incredibly versatile. You can do tons of things with it, and it just tastes awesome. For the record, I will also eat tacos any second, anytime, any meal. But if I got to pick, like if there was one food I'd eat over and over, I'm probably going to go pizza.
Yeah,
I absolutely love pizza. But now that we're talking about it, can somebody get us some pizza and tacos?
Yeah,
while
for
we're
real.
doing this?
Can we just go
I'd like to settle this on it. If you're watching live and want to run grab us some, turn your phone off while you drive, but then come bring us some over.
Right, exactly. No, that'd be great.
That was a
Greatly
fun
appreciate
question.
I have to say, I'm going to sway the vote here.
Yeah, you are.
I'm a taco guy.
We had
And
no idea
I
that
know,
was
it's
coming.
So,
This is
so
flabbergasting to me.
So surprising. It doesn't matter where the taco's from, homemade, Taco Bell.
Where you
it's
have
from.
stock in, I think.
Oh,
So-
yeah. I think so, yeah. I'm like obligated to mention Taco Bell every time that I'm in front of a camera or on a stage. So Oliver Campo, he says tacos. All right, Jack Parker, tacos. Lawrence says tacos. All right, we got some taco folks. Dude, I hate to bring it to you, but in the
That's okay.
minority
When we all go eat together, I'll just get all the pizza. It's going to work out fine for me.
And we'll just have all the tacos.
Oh
That's gonna
man,
work out fine
Jess
for me.
says tacos. Oh, Jess says tacos and
And
pizza.
I think that's the words of wisdom right there.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think there's some words of wisdom.
Definitely can't go wrong with either of those things. So that's awesome, man. Cool. So here's another question. This is a really good question. Definitely, again, one of those things that maybe that should just be like a stipulation for like all the questions that sometimes we don't have the answers, but we're also trying to find the answers, and we've lived life probably a little bit longer, and so as we were walking, we found a couple answers. But Emily, I'm gonna ask you this one.
Okay.
Does your appearance matter to other people?
So if we're talking about wearing sweatshirts or like sweatpants and a t-shirt to a wedding, then yes, your appearance matters.
Probably, yeah.
But if it's not that, I would say our appearance does not matter. I know that's hard to think about when we're such in a digital age where we see a lot of things come across social media that would make us believe that what we wear or how we look is what's going to be the next big thing for us. Yeah. But I'll also say this, when it comes to following trends, there's not a problem with following trends at all. Whether it be the next big clothing thing or really cool Adidas shoes, because I really like Adidas shoes, and I think Riley's really big into Adidas shoes.
I dabble.
But when it comes to following trends, I don't see that as a problem. But where it does become a problem is when we place our identity in those things. Whether it's the hoodie that we have to have, or the shoes, or the next iPhone that comes out, whatever that may be, when we begin to place our identity into that, then that's when it becomes a problem. Our identity is not solely based on our appearance, but it is solely based on who Christ says we are. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, people are not going to remember what you wore or what you look like. They're going to remember how you acted and how you treated others. But our appearance does not matter. It's okay to follow trends, but just remember that our identity is not based on those two things.
Yeah, that's so good.
That's so good.
So, follow-up question, kind of in the same vein. So, how do we learn not to care what people think and say about us if all that is the case?
So it goes back to the whole identity thing. I had to practice not worrying about other people's opinions and what they thought about me. Have I fully accomplished that? Absolutely not. I'm 27 and I still struggle. Sometimes there are still moments in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm really worried about what this person thinks of me or what they have to say, whether it's meeting someone new or speaking in front of people. I always worried about the thoughts and opinions, but I would like to think that now I'm not as worried about what people think and say, there's a few verses. I think one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 139, and it just talks about how the Lord knows us. He created us, and He's for us. Like verse 1 says, "Oh Lord, you've examined my heart, and you know everything about me." And then you look at verse 17 and 18, it says, "How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me." And I think it's important to ground yourself in knowing where your identity comes from. Our identity is not placed in the hands of man, and it's not placed in the opinions of people, but it is placed in the one who created us and knows us more than anyone, because we are skillfully and we are wonderfully made, and it comes easier for us to believe in what people say about us when our identity is not based on who Christ says we are.
Yeah, that's so good. And I don't know. I think for a long time people have kind of stereotyped that girls are the only ones who deal with issues with appearance, and that's something that I've wrestled with my whole life too. Not just with clothing, but how other people see me and my activities, or what I'm doing at school, those sort of things. And I don't know. I think it's important for us as guys to be honest with that sort of stuff and start to talk about that openly. Because when we start to talk about those with people that we trust, that we kind of start to get healing from that sort of thing, where we can be honest and say, hey, like, I'm really wrestling with this. And it might sound really silly, but this is what I'm going through. And I think as we start to talk about those things, we find out that there's other people that are going through the same thing. And they're like, dude, me too. Like, how can we help each other and support each other through that? I think it's so important.
I just think y'all show so much. There's so much wisdom in y'all dividing those two questions too, because there is a place with worrying about appearance, and then there's this whole other thing that. So let me just say live. I'll confess, as a 40-year-old, it can't be over all of this completely. I mean, like, because worrying about what other people think about us isn't just how we look; it's how we are perceived. It's, am I good enough? Am I successful enough? Like, it's all those pieces. They are so interrelated, and yet there is a little bit of a differentiation. And you answered the question so well that it comes back to, do we trust that our identity is really rooted in Christ?
Yeah. Is that where our confidence comes from?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. That's so good. Cool. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. This question is more about creation. We had a couple of questions about creation and science, and I think that's really, really cool. So I'm going to ask Will this one. He's going to kind of tackle these for us. The first one is this: why did God put Adam and Eve in the garden if he already knew what was going to happen?
Yeah. So this is part of what I meant at the beginning when Riley said, and Emily were talking about, there were so many questions. They weren't just a lot of questions. They were really good questions.
Seriously.
So I hope every person in our church are asking this level of question. So we could talk much more about this, and we're going to give you some ways to get in touch. There's notes we would share with you, resources we'd love for you to wrestle, but just kind of flying by. A couple of things I think we need to understand. One, I grew up in church my whole life, and I think I always had the perception, I always imagined the Garden of Eden being like, all right, God walks Adam out and he's like, all right, there's two trees. You can eat off one of them, but if you eat off the other one, it's bad, and it's all going to be bad. And as if Adam had a 50-50 shot, it was a flip of a coin. But that's not what it tells us. It tells us that in a garden, in a grove of trees with hundreds or thousands of trees, there was one tree. I mean, God tried to slight this in Adam and Eve's favor. And so it's not that God was just trying. It says in Genesis 2:16 and 17, the Lord commanded the man, you may eat of any tree in the garden except this one tree. And so he was trying to make it in their favor. He gave them every tree. They just couldn't eat of one. So that's one thing I would tell you to remember. The second is, God put the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden because he wanted Adam and Eve to choose whether they would obey him or not. He wanted it to be a choice. Like, it's not really love if there's not some choice. If God hadn't put the tree there, they would have essentially been robots, just programmed to do what God had told them to do. But it was important it's important for us now to know that God didn't want robots. He wanted a relationship with people, like humanity. And that's what he was after. It wasn't just about getting them to do it. And so the whole declaration of the fruit being evil is never really about the fruit. We always image it as an apple. But whatever it was, it's not that it was bad. It was that he needed to know that there could be boundaries. And it has everything to do with Adam and Eve were questioning, is God really good? Like, can I really trust him? Their sin was about doubt. And so when they eat the fruit, it opens their eyes to their own capacity to do what God didn't want them to do. And so that that changes everything. It brought all the brokenness and corruption into our lives. It changes everything. But it's really important to us, and we were talking about this in preparation, it's really important to us that you know, that you believe that God didn't want Adam and Eve to sin. It was not God's desire that we would live in this disconnection from him. He knew ahead of time that it would happen because God is all-knowing. But it wasn't, he's not the cause agent of that. The results of it, all of the sickness, death, and hurt that plagued the world, like none of that's the way God wanted things to be. And so it's really imperative that we not just see that God put a tree in a garden, but that when Adam and Eve chose it, in the very beginning of, we're 3 or 4 pages into the Bible, that it tells us in Genesis 3:21 that God went and killed an animal and he covered up this naked man and woman, and who only know of their nakedness because they've sinned. God is already covering their sin. And whenever we get to talk about this, we love to say that in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, we're already getting an image, a picture of what Jesus will look like when he comes. That for our own brokenness, our own mistakes, that Jesus becomes the covering for our sin. So again, we could talk more about that, but that's something I think it's so pivotal for us to understand early in the Bible, is that God was not the cause agent. It wasn't his design, but he was the redeemer of their brokenness and our brokenness as well.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. A follow-up question, kind of in the same vein as that, how does God's story of creation fit into scientifically proven things such as the Big Bang Theory?
All right, so I'm kind of known for liking to study a particular book in the New Testament, which is Mark. In the Old Testament, I really love to study Genesis. I think if we study these kind of questions, it helps us understand the rest of the Bible. I love that y'all asked it. So Genesis 1:1, the opening of the Bible. Do y'all know the opening words of the Bible? It's not a test. I'm not going to fire you if you don't get it. Do you know how it starts?
In the beginning.
See, I knew you both knew it. That's why I said that. In the beginning, God. Like, that's how it starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so what I tell people when they ask me, what I would tell, I used to go to a local school and work with 9th graders in kind of discussing these issues. And I would tell them, I would tell adults that I've taught with, I'd tell anybody that when they ask this question, to be a follower of Jesus, what you have to believe about how the world began is those words. In the beginning was God. From there, if you believe that by faith, that in the beginning, before all things, there was God, from there we can use our brains. There are people who are so much smarter than me who will explain to you scientifically how the world is millions and billions of years old. And there are people who are much smarter than me who will explain to you that the world is 6,780, whatever the number is today, years old. And I don't know that I even care which one of them is wrong, because I think what they would both agree on is their belief that in the beginning was God. And so in a church our size, I promise there are people who most certainly believe the world is millions and billions of years old. And there are some who probably believes it's thousands of years old. And that's just not an essential piece for us. What I would encourage you, what I would implore any of us, our whole church, is to believe that in the beginning was God, and that God chose, however he chose to create all things, God did it. And Genesis 1 isn't written to be a historical document anyway. It's a poetic rendering of how all things were created. But here's the crazy thing, and I wish I hadn't been like in my late 20s when I learned this. So we're letting you be way ahead of some curve.
Getting out of it.
That's right. Ahead of it is. If you look at the 6 days of creation, you should go look at it later in chapter 1. It's about 15 verses. If you look at it, every day needs the day before. So somehow Moses, a couple thousand years later, sits down and writes it, and he gets it scientifically in order. So either they kept really good notebooks, or like God helped frame some flow of how things had to come to be. I just think that's really phenomenal. Do I have time to ask one more real quick thing?
Sure.
So there's this other thing we love to do in a couple of teaching settings, and it's to ask this question. I've asked you both before in different settings, so you can play along. How old do you imagine Adam was when you read the beginning? Like when God made Adam, how old does he make Adam?
I mean, I've always pictured him, I don't know, for some reason, like 30s.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing. I don't know if you'd see a child wandering in.
Exactly. So I've asked this question like hundreds of people, and nobody's ever said baby. You know, as if God made a baby, it was just like, I'll come back and check on you in a few years. Like nobody imagines that. I've had people tell me 33 because that's how long Jesus. You know, they get technical.
Really specific.
We ain't got no idea how. But I tell you what, I don't think he was is a baby. And so, if God could make a man, a human, with all the renderings of age, I have no problem if he created a world that has all the evidence of age, even if it's not quite as old. On the first day Adam breathed, he was 1 day old, even if his body looked 30 years old or 18 years old. Yeah. And so I have no problem for both to have some way of being true, that the world is X year old, but it looks and appears like it's this old because God can do things like that. So,
yeah, anyway. Man, that's super good. I think, obviously, Googling things, especially WebMD, I think we can get really dangerous if we don't know the sources that we're going to. And so I think what Will said is great. I mean, the first source that we have is the Bible. And then from there, talking to people that we trust about those sorts of things and figuring out how science and faith blend together. How it's not black and white, how it's some sort of gray area. And I mean, the reality is that no one knows the true answer, and we might not ever know. But I think it's okay to think about those things. But like you're saying, as long as it's like not the essential thing, I think it's totally cool.
And founding on the one part of that needs to be black and white is that God was there in the beginning.
Exactly.
Everything after that is just let it be useful discussion.
Yes.
But we don't have to die on those hills.
Yeah. So. I think that's super good. So, hey, if you're just joining us, we've been answering some questions that we got from last Wednesday for this Real Talk series. We're really excited about all of the questions. There's been so many good ones. So thanks for everybody who's already been participating in the chat. People who've been giving some shout outs. Lila says, "Hey, Dad," by the way.
Oh, wow. So, hello to my 10-year-old. Hope you're learning a lot. Take some notes.
So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, any follow-up questions you want to ask about the things that we're talking about, go ahead and hit us up in the chat, and we would love to answer those questions live as we're walking through these questions. We want to answer what's helpful for you. So please, by all means, continue to ask questions, and we'll figure out how to answer them here live. So we're just going to keep rolling with questions. If you have anything, go ahead and post. So the next question is this: how do I get closer to God? And we had a couple questions that were similar, so I'm going to kind of it'll be like a stage by stage answer. So how do I get closer to God? How do I pray effectively? And how do I tell God, or how do I tell when God's giving me a sign? And so I'm going to start with how do I get closer to God? Because I think the other two hinge on that. Actually, me and Will and a bunch of other people from the Orchard got to this conference about a month ago called New Room. And one of the speakers there, his name was Jack Deere. And Jack Deere, his like biggest thing was that he wanted to be a friend of God. Above anything else, he wanted to be God's friend. And when I started to think about what does it look like to become friends with somebody, what's the thing that you have to do to become friends with somebody?
You got to spend some time with them.
You got to spend some time with them. So I think as we try to get closer to God, as we try to become friends with God, we just got to spend time with him. And at first, just like a friendship, sometimes that's awkward. Like, you don't really know what to talk about. You don't really know what interests are for everybody. Like, I mean, do they play Xbox? Or do they play PlayStation? Like, are they cool with pizza or are they cool with tacos? Like, trying to figure it out, you know?
Solving the world's problems.
And as you start to spend more time with them, you start to know the things that you have in common. You start to know the ways that you're different. You really get to know their heart. And as we start to try to get closer to God, sometimes it's awkward in that same way. We don't really know what to say if we need to say anything at all. We don't really know what to read in the Bible and what God's trying to say to us through that. But the more that we spend time with that, and the more that we ask questions about that, and the more that we try it, the easier that it gets, the closer we're able to get to God, and to the point where God is our friend, that we know what he thinks, that we know what he knows. And from that place, things like prayer and hearing his voice and what he might be telling us gets a lot easier. So I think one of the ways to get closer to God is to pray. Whether you know the right words to pray or not. I mentioned earlier, if you were in the live video, then that I carve out time every single day to just sit down with God and pray. And a lot of times, the first thing I do is I just sit down in silence. And I don't say anything at all, and I just spend time with God. And a lot of times, God, through that time, I'll realize what I need to start praying for. People will come to my mind, or situations that need prayer will come to my mind. And that might sound crazy. That might sound different. And if that doesn't happen to you, that's okay. Sometimes it doesn't. But God's placed you in your families. He's placed you in your schools and your sports teams, all these different places in your life, to where if you don't really know what to pray, like, just pray for those things. It's really, sometimes we try to complicate it and wonder if we're praying the right thing, but God isn't necessarily concerned whether we're praying the right thing or not. He just wants to hear our voice. And the more times that we go to him and offer him those things, we'll find out those places where we're doing the right thing and where we're doing the wrong thing. And God will start to answer those prayers if we're asking for the right things. As far as signs go, anything is possible with God. I just want to say that beforehand, the scriptures are like filled with all sorts of things where God has spoken in miraculous ways. Like he's made pillars of smoke and pillars of fire to like lead the Israelites through the desert whenever they were lost. But I also want to tell you this. The most signs that I've ever gotten from God are just by sitting down and opening up the Bible. The times where I've sat down and I've read scripture, whether it was from a reading plan or whether it was because I was reading through a book with one of my closest friends, or whether it was because I got a notification on my phone that the verse of the day was this, where I sat down and I read the Bible, just something popped up and instantly I knew that God was telling me something through that Bible passage. A really recent example, it's funny because I'm on social media right now in this video, but one of those examples is social media. I felt like God was calling me to give social media up for a while. And in Matthew 19, Jesus is talking about people who give up things for the kingdom of heaven. And it was something that I had been wrestling with for a really long time. And when I read that Bible passage, it was like, holy crap. Like, this is speaking to me. Like, this is what I need to do. And it was, I guess you could call it a sign, something that God was speaking to me very clearly that I needed to do. And it wasn't an audible voice. It wasn't like a thing that I saw. It was God speaking to me just because I had spent time with him. I knew that the Holy Spirit was giving me the sign of the next step that I needed to take. Do y'all have any thoughts about that? Is it similar to you, or like how do y'all experience that?
I kind of smiled and laughed during your talk, but it was only because, do you ever have somebody say something and you think of a story or something somebody told you haven't thought about it in years?
Yeah.
I had a mentor at one season in my life who used to say, so in Exodus chapter 3, there's this famous story where Moses sees a burning bush, a sign. And he used to say, every bush that's burning isn't a sign. Sometimes somebody just doesn't know how to handle matches. And so it's the idea of sometimes things just happen, the way our world works. So what we don't need to be looking for is a sign, and everything doesn't need to be interpreted of, the weather is a certain way today. I wonder if the Lord, everything's not. What you say so well, Riley, and I probably need to hear, I think everybody needs to hear, is when there is something from God, it will be consistent with every other thing we've experienced with God.
For sure.
Who his character is, what his nature is. He can do miraculous and mighty things, but the fabric of it will be consistent with who we've always known him to be. And so I just think that's so important for us to hold on to, that everything doesn't have to be interpreted that way.
Yep, that's good. And two, community is so important when you start to talk about stuff like that.
So glad.
I think it's really easy to convince ourselves or convince ourselves not, convince ourselves the opposite whenever we sit down and we experience those things. So make sure, whether it's an adult that you trust or a friend that you trust, to start to talk about those things whenever you do feel like God's revealing those things to you. Because a lot of times God doesn't just speak through scriptures. He doesn't just speak to us in prayer. He speaks to us through other people. And if you find those true friends, those friends are going to tell you like, hey, that's God, or hey, maybe we need to pray about this and talk about this a little bit more. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Here's a fun question. Would you rather go a month without the internet or go a month without heating or air conditioning?
The internet.
The internet?
Yeah. And I need some. I can do without heating.
Yeah.
But it's when you say the cool part. July in Mississippi in no time. I'll give up the internet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need a little AC blowing if possible.
No, that's a good point.
I'm gonna choose that convenience in July.
Yeah,
in August.
I don't even have to think about it. Internet, for sure. I would not be able to live, I think, without heating and cooling. So
Right, yeah, it'd be tough.
I'd be fine without internet, for sure.
We won't even discuss that some of us spent almost half our life without the internet anyway. So I won't bring that up, and I appreciate y'all not saying that.
Definitely not
letting
gonna
me
throw
say
it
that.
there.
So
Yeah, that's funny.
no bus to throw me under.
I'm already going without heating and air in my car, so like, does that kind of count? Like,
You're
am
getting
I
a preview already.
I'm already like living this Would You Rather
So
question.
you're
or,
sort of
like-
going up without internet and then sort of going without.
Yeah, right. Man.
Best of
Yeah, I
both.
got the short end of the stick there.
Yeah.
I don't know how that worked.
Doing without some parts of all of those.
Yeah, for real. That was funny, man. That was funny. So we have a few minutes left, so we're gonna how about one more question each? Does that sound good
Yep.
to y'all? So Emily, I'll ask you the first one. So how can, sorry, the grammar that I have on this question is not right. Maybe I copy and pasted it wrong. So, oh no, that's right. How could a biblical perspective help with anxiety?
So first off, it's a big step to even ask a question about anxiety. And so
Yes,
I applaud you if you ask that question. And so if you're watching and you ask that question, or maybe you were afraid to ask that question, I want you to know that anxiety is not something that we just stick a Band-Aid on and then push to the side. Second, the most important thing when anxiety happens is to tackle that head on. I've dealt with anxiety for many years, and I've learned here recently that it is very important, and it's very healthy, and it's very okay to feel those things, but to deal with it in a healthy way, whether that is to take a Sabbath or to take a weekend just to kind of decompress and see where that comes from. And I also totally understand how it's easy to push anxiety to the side and hope that it just easily, fades out, which is not always the case. You should never push your anxiety to the side. But I think a biblical perspective comes from Matthew 6, verses 30 through 34, which is God talking about how he cares for the wildflowers that are here today and then thrown in the fire tomorrow, and questioning why we have so little faith. And if he cares for those things, then he certainly cares for you. And so the important question to ask yourself is where do you put your faith when worry and doubts come knocking at the door? Another important thing is to find someone that you can talk to about the way that you're feeling. I also want you to know that what you feel matters. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise, but to find someone that you can trust and talk to when it comes to trying to deal with your anxiety. Like there's been multiple times I sat in your office and I have cried because I have dealt with some stuff, but it is so important to know that you can have someone to talk to about how you feel, who's going to listen to you, who's going to pray for you, and do whatever it takes to make sure that you are healthy. So.
That's good. Yeah, I can retweet the like vocalizing those things. There's just something about being able to talk those things out loud and someone to tell you that you're not crazy.
Yeah.
And that there's a reason for the way that you're feeling.
Yes.
And what y'all map out is a healthy way, because if we're just having real talk, that's what we're calling this, right? Real talk is people at every age and stage will give you mechanisms for numbing that aren't really about dealing. This is not even a moral conversation. They'll tell you to get distracted, to enjoy yourself, to party, like whatever it is, to numb it. But that's like taking a pain. If I break my arm, that's like taking a painkiller. It may help for a little while, but at some point I've got to work on my arm. Yeah. And so I think what Emily maps out for you is such a healthy way, like that we do need to vocalize and as she said, tackle it, like go after, like find a plan with somebody who cares about us. It's so good.
That's awesome. So similar ways, because I know that this makes a lot of people anxious. There's a couple questions about FOMO, fear of missing out. How do you deal with FOMO if that's something that you're feeling, that you're wrestling with?
So I think, so the phrase has only been coined in the last few years. So I think we think this is a brand new reality, but it kind of came together in us working on this. I've never really used this language for it, but do you know that the thing we talked about earlier in the Garden of Eden, I think is our first instance of fear of missing out. Adam and Eve are in the garden. The serpent comes and says, God doesn't want you to eat the fruit because he's held out on you. There's something better. There's a better way to live. There's more. He doesn't want you to be like him. And so Adam and Eve eat the fruit because they've been convinced that God has led them to miss out, that he's hid something from them. So if you're feeling that, if you battle that, is the root of every sin we commit, is that there's something better. We need to find some way to satisfy ourselves. So I don't say that to say it's okay. I say that to encourage you. This is not a new reality. And I think because of that, we begin to miss out on what God actually has for us. Because if we fear if we're obedient to God, then, well, what is that going to mean for my relationships? Or will people see me the same way? Or will I lose status? Or will I find the job I want one day? Or the marriage I want? Or the school I want to get into? Or whatever it is, at every stage of our life, the decisions we feel like that we have before us. It's not new. It has been intensified, as Emily did a great job talking about earlier. Social media turns up the volume on that for us a little bit. And we see everyone's best life, and we think, well, our life's not that extravagant. Or even worse, we compose a fake life and use that as kind of our internet appearance. But it's not actually how we're feeling. Everything looks pretty on the outside, but we're decaying on the inside. So here's just a couple of things. And I feel like this is one of those we could definitely all talk about for a while. Hey, live your life with intent. That which we do not do on purpose will accidentally never do. So determine the kind of person you want to be and become, and don't really worry about what everybody else maps out as their way forward. Live with intent. Live with gratitude. One of the practices we have at our house, no matter who's there, whether it's the five of us or friends or guests, we end each day by going, what are we thankful for? Because there's something about gratitude kind of reorients me back to the life I actually want to live. What are we going to be thankful for? What are we going to be grateful for? Live in the present. I fast forwarded a lot of seasons of my life where I'm like, if I can just get out of middle school, then real life, if I can just get my license, if I can just make the varsity baseball team, if I can just once I graduate, I'm getting out of this town and I'm never coming back. And and all of a sudden we wake up one day and there's not a next to move to.
Right.
And so we've been constantly worried about what's next. So live in the present, but do live with eternity in mind. There's a verse that means a lot to me personally. It's in a New Testament book about 5/6 of the way through the Bible, Colossians chapter 3. And it says, set your sights on heaven where your real life is hidden there with Christ. And it's just the idea that the life we're really created for is a life that endures. And so let's not make temporary decisions when we were created. Our souls were created for eternity. Like there's a longer perspective. So let's live where we are, but let's make decisions today in light of the kind of life we want to live forever.
Dude, that's really good. I think personally, growing up my whole life, I would say, well, this is a problem right now, but it won't be a problem in the future. And I would just kind of write it off and never really took the time to actually try to fix the things that I was dealing with. So if you're out there and you're starting to think through some of these things and you're asking these questions, like I just really want to encourage you. Asking the question is the first step. And I'm so proud of all the questions that you've asked and brought up. And hopefully this conversation that we started today, because this is just the start of the conversation. We want to continue to have this open conversation about real issues. Hopefully it encourages you to start to bring some of those issues to the surface and talk to them, talk to other people about them, and really start to free yourself from those things. Because we'll continue talking about a lot of questions about relationships, about faith, about anxiety and depression, and all these things weigh us down so much every single day. But I just want to continue to encourage you to set your sights on Jesus. He doesn't say that everything's going to be perfect. He doesn't say that everything's going to be okay, smooth sailing, like we're never going to deal with anything. But he does say, hey, there's a hope that one day all this is going to be restored. So we want to be those people here on earth so that the people around us don't have to deal with these things in the future. So that's why we want to do this. We want to encourage you, help you grow, and help you be world changers. I mean, that's really why we're here and why we work at the Orchard, because we believe in you guys and believe that you're going to do it. So if you have any questions, you can connect with us after this. How can people connect with y'all?
You can email me if you like that, willwiththeorchard.net. But more likely, you can follow me on Twitter at Will Rambo or on Instagram at William T. Rambo, because somebody stole Will Rambo before I started.
Dang, man, that's brutal.
It's terrible.
That's brutal, man. So my accounts on social media are still there. It's at Riley Maine. Mane. You can go and follow me there. Eventually I'll be back on social media. I'm not off of it for forever. It might be until the end of the year, but I'll be back on at some point. And you can definitely email me at riley@theorchard.net, or you can come by the church literally any day and say, hey, I need to talk to Riley, and I'll come hang out with you. It'll be great.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram, Emily Crosby with 4 Y's, or Emily@theorchard.net, or you're more than welcome, like Riley said, to come hang out at the office. So
if you come by, I want to hang out too.
Yeah, we'll just have a real party. We'll have a real talk party in person. So hey, can't thank you guys enough for tuning in. Looking forward to next week, where we're going to go live next Tuesday at 4, and we're going to start our Real Talk series at OSM, 6 p.m. on Wednesday. We will see you guys then.